Chapter 36. Renesmee stirred around 5 a.m. "She's waking up," whispered Jacob, his voice betraying excitement. He jumped up from the chair he had been sitting in, but then sat back down quickly when Rose shot him a death glare. As I watched through his mind, Renesmee's eyes started to open and close, and her mouth pulled into a wide yawn as she stretched two fisted hands over her head.
"Good morning, sleepyhead,"
said Rosalie, gazing down at her adoringly. Renesmee blinked sleepily several more times, and then smiled. She immediately put her hand on Rosalie's neck, filling her thoughts with a vision of Rose feeding her.
"One-track mind,"
thought Rose, smiling. "Hungry, are we?" Carlyle appeared in the door, a silver cup in his hand. "Excellent," he said. Rosalie and Esme had managed to convince him not to try the formula last night, but he was determined to give it a go today. Rosalie stood up, carefully passing the baby into Carlyle's arms. He sat down on the couch, and Rose knelt down next to him. Everyone leaned in close, Jasper and Emmett watching from behind the couch. Carlyle lowered the bottle close to Renesmee's face. She sniffed suspiciously, and then recoiled. From what I saw in her thoughts, it did smell revolting. Her hand shot up to Carlyle's neck, showing the same vision she had shown Rose. This time she recalled the taste and flavor of the blood she had been fed. I swallowed hard at the pang of fire that her thoughts brought to my dry throat. "I know, sweetheart," said Carlyle gently, "but let's just try this." He lowered the bottle, touching it to her lips. Renesmee reached up with both hands, clutching and pulling at the bottle. Carlyle released it to her, marveling at her strength and coordination, and thinking she might be more willing to try it on her own terms. Renesmee regarded the bottle for a moment, turning it around in her hands and sniffing at the opening a couple of times. Then she moved one of her hands to the spout, and with a shocking creak, bent back the metal spout so that it was bent closed. Then she smiled up at Carlyle and pushed the bottle back into his hands. Carlyle's mouth gaped slightly in surprise, and there was stunned silence for a moment. "Saucy little thing, isn't she?" Emmett finally commented, and everyone laughed.
"Just stubborn, like her father,"
Rosalie said, smiling to herself. Her mother is plenty stubborn too, I thought. Maybe persistent was a better word.
"Can you blame her?"
said Alice.
"That stuff smells awful. Do human babies actually drink it?"
"I think," said Esme, heading towards the kitchen.
"I better get her a bottle of blood."
Carlyle nodded, still speechless. Jacob was continuing to watch Renesmee intently, anxiety lacing his thoughts. Carlyle had measured the baby about an hour ago, determining that she had grown 1¼ inches in the previous 4 hours. Jacob had been shocked to discover her rate of growth, and had spent the last hour exchanging worried glances with Seth, who had spent the last several hours at our house. Seth had even taken a turn holding a sleeping Renesmee, looking awkward but happy as he cradled her in his long arms.
"Oh!"
Alice said suddenly. I started scanning her thoughts. Her mind was full of a vision of Charlie talking on the phone, his face angry, car keys in his hand.
"Charlie's going to call again at—"
She refocused her perspective of the vision, catching the clock on the microwave.
"He'll call at 6 a.m., and if we try to tell him again that Bella is still in quarantine, he'll come to the house."
Everyone glanced quickly at Carlyle. He sighed, his face turning pensive. "What if we tell him she's been admitted to the University of Washington Medical Center in Seattle, under a team of specialists?" Alice's eyes unfocused, and I watched in her mind a vision of Charlie in his police car, screeching up to the entrance of the UW Medical Center. She shook her head, her eyes clearing.
"He'll go looking for her. He's done waiting."
"Damn," snapped Jasper. He looked pointedly at Carlyle. "I knew it was foolish to stay. We have to leave." Behind him in an armchair, Jacob paled. I stood up, wondering if I should intercede. This was not the time to leave. There had to be a way around this. Carlyle let out a long breath. What if we tell him that I've brought her to the CDC in Atlanta to undergo special tests? Alice held up a finger, her eyes fading far away. She saw Charlie banging down the phone, and then sitting down heavily in a kitchen chair, putting his head in his hands. I felt a flash of pain for him. Alice blinked once.
"Should be okay, for now,"
she said. "For now," said Jasper in a hard voice. "Esme should speak to him," said Carlyle. Esme, returning from the kitchen with a new bottle, nodded. Jacob glanced up at her from the chair, avoiding Rosalie's eyes, and said in a hesitant voice, "Could I feed her?" Esme smiled down at him, nodding, while Rosalie shook her head angrily on the other side of the room. But Carlyle spoke up. "Actually, Jacob, I've wanted to talk to you about trying to re-establish the treaty with Sam's pack." Jacob looked up at him, surprised, but then nodded, his expression turning resigned. Rosalie took the baby from Carlyle, and then sauntered over to retrieve the bottle from Esme, a smug look on her face. Carlyle moved close to Jacob. "We need to have the freedom to move in our lands, to leave safely if necessary." He was concerned about how long we could hold off Charlie.
"And we need a serious shopping trip,"
Alice interjected.
"My niece will not spend another minute wrapped in a blue blanket." "It's true," said Rosalie. "She's already outgrown all the clothes Emmett bought her last week, and they were all blue anyhow." "That's the last time I let Bella predict something," said Alice, rolling her eyes. Carlyle smiled slightly and looked back at Jacob. "Also, a couple of us still need to go hunt, and Bella will be very thirsty as well when she awakes." Jacob cringed inwardly at this thought, but nodded. "I also need to explain to Sam what's happened with Renesmee and me." He shifted uncomfortably. "Well, let's hope it goes better than it did with Leah," Jasper muttered. Emmett snorted. Jacob had spent the last several hours slightly shell-shocked from Leah's hissy fit, as Emmett called it, earlier in the evening. "You did what?" Leah had growled angrily, when Jacob had announced, somewhat unceremoniously in his nervousness, that Bella had given birth, and he had imprinted on her baby. "You did what?" "Leah, I can't believe this! You imprinted on a vampire?" Her voice had elevated up several octaves to a piercing shriek. "How is that even possible?" "She's only half vampire," Jacob said quickly. Leah's expression was appalled. "You've really lost it this time, Jake." Her voice had gotten lower, darker. "This is truly sick. Is this some sort of psycho reaction to Bella dumping you? Can't have her, so try for the daughter?" Jacob's teeth snapped together. "You of all people know this is not something I had control over," he growled. Pain had flashed in Leah's eyes. "Edward knows about this, and he hasn't killed you?" "Not yet," muttered Jacob. Leah stared at him in pure disbelief. "You're crazy, you know that?" she hissed. "Leah," Jacob was irritated. "If you would just listen for a—" But Leah's expression had turned wild, her voice growing loud. "First you're madly in love with Bella, then you come here to kill the bloodsucker, but the bloodsucker asked you to make babies with her, and then he asked you to kill him anyways." I had cringed, as this line elicited several sharp intakes of breaths downstairs. "So then you become the knight in shining armor to save her, and now you've been printed on her half-bloodsucker kid. Am I getting all this right, or have I left something out?" "Enough, Leah," Jacob growled. No, she raved. "Hold on, wait, this is just too much. Do you mean to tell me that one day Edward and Bella will be your in-laws?" The last word came out as a half-shriek, half-laugh. Oh, the irony. "What are you going to do? Have part human, bloodsucker, and wolf kids? Can't wait to see that.
Jacob just glared at her.
You're mad.
Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Then she gestured around madly towards the house.
You're all mad,
she yelled loudly.
I'm never going to escape this filthy, reeking place.
She had run off into the forest. Seth had arrived 15 minutes later, anxious to phase and escape Leah's rantings in his mind. Now Jacob was watching Renesmee, hating to leave her, not knowing what awaited him on the reservation. Finally he sighed, and then got to his feet. Seth stood up as well. "No," said Jacob quickly. "You stay here." Seth's brow furrowed.
No way, Jake. You're not going to La Push by yourself.
"No," Jacob repeated, determined. "This is between Sam and me. I need to do this on my own." He turned and walked over to where Rose sat with the baby. "Bye, Nessie," he said softly, gazing down at her and touching her cheek, the pain of separation already in his chest. Her wide eyes watched him. "I'll be back soon."
Oh, gag,
thought Rosalie, trying to ignore him.
Don't bother rushing back. In fact, please don't ever come back.
Several minutes later, after a few more words with Carlyle, Jacob left, first engaging in a short argument with the still furious Leah on the edge of the lawn, before heading towards La Push on his own. The atmosphere of the house was subdued, anxious, as we waited for the results of Jacob's visit. Esme handled the phone call from Charlie as gracefully as possible. Renesmee drifted back into sleep after drinking her fill, her dreams a cascade of familiar faces against the backsplash of the night sky, crowned by the yellow orbs of the stars and surrounded by the swaying movements of giant trees. Rose and Alice quietly discussed their shopping trip, joined by Esme, who was hoping they could purchase some final items for the cottage. She was anxious to have it completed by the time Bella awoke, and the three women discussed the final plans in hushed excitement. I sensed annoyance from Jasper at the direction of the conversation, and eventually he pulled Alice aside. "It's ridiculous," he said quietly. "Edward and Bella are not going to be able to live in that cottage, not in the condition she'll be in when she awakes."
We don't know that,
said Alice.
It doesn't hurt to have it completed.
Jasper sighed impatiently. "He won't be able to handle her alone," he muttered. "And we have to leave." I felt a stab of annoyance at his words, even though I could not disregard the layers of truth beneath them. Still, the vision of being at that cottage with Bella, living on our own with Renesmee, a family, my family, an impossibility that suddenly seemed so tantalizing, torturously close, and I wanted to reach my hand out and grab it. Carlyle had handled me on his own, and I was, if nothing, faster than Carlyle. But then there was Renesmee, and the blood in her veins, and even still, none of this mattered unless Bella woke up. Her still face seemed to fill the room. I lifted her wrist and breathed deeply. The scent of morphine was so very faint. How much longer would it act as an excuse for her lack of response? I was hit again with the perverse thought that I wished she would wake up, would scream in agony, anything, everything, to let me know she was still in there. "Stop it," I thought viciously. "Don't wish pain on her to ease your own suffering." It should be a miracle that she had been able to exist so peacefully, as the venom obviously burned through her veins. That was, of course, assuming her unconscious state was painless, that the fire did not burn on some level. My stomach moved into my throat, and I grasped Bella's hand tightly. "I'm here, love," I whispered. "I'm with you." I kissed her cheek softly. "Let her escape the pain, please." Suddenly, a mental call broke into my thoughts. It was Jacob. "Edward, we're coming back." "We?" I thought in alarm. I scanned his thoughts, and saw he was racing towards the house with Sam beside him, Jared and Paul following. What was he doing? "Carlyle," I called softly. "Jacob is coming back with some of the pack." Jasper came through the door first, followed quickly by Carlyle and Emmett. "What's going on, Edward?" Carlyle asked in a low voice. "Jacob is returning. He has Sam, Paul, and Jared with him." "He's bringing them here?" asked Emmett incredulously. I nodded. "Damn it," snapped Jasper. "What the hell?" He paced over to look out the window. "Hold on," said Carlyle calmly. "This may be a good sign. What do you see, Edward?" I scanned Jacob's mind, looking for answers. "Edward, listen," he thought, as if sensing my silent mental inquiry. He began to replay the memory of his confrontation with Sam in careful detail. As Jacob had penetrated the treaty line, he could see Paul and Jared running several yards out beside him, their eyes watching him closely. He slowed and phased into human form, thinking it was the least confrontational way to approach Sam. Paul and Jared closed ranks in front of him, and he had followed them until the forest broke into a clearing. Sam was there in wolf form, waiting for him, flanked by Quill and Embry. Paul and Jared moved into place behind Sam, Paul taking the position of second. After regarding Jacob for several seconds with his cold black eyes, Sam phased. He stood in front of the wolves, arms crossed, face hard, and his voice was like ice in Jacob's ears. "What are you doing here, Jake?" he asked. "Why have you come? As I can sense you maintain your alpha status, I don't see that we have anything to say to each other." Jacob's expression was stiff, but he was unsurprised by his hostility. He had suspected Sam would still resent being so blatantly defied when he had left the pack. "My being an alpha, Sam, is not going to change. I couldn't change it now, even if I wanted." "You can release the members of my pack you've taken, then," Sam snapped. Jacob sighed heavily. "Like I told Jared, Seth and Leah are free to leave at any time." Sam shook his head. "Seth is too young and impressionable to make this kind of decision, and Leah—" He paused briefly, drawing in a deep breath. "She has emotional baggage that interferes with her decision process." Jacob felt a flash of anger. "I think you underestimate them both. They are perfectly capable of making their own decisions." Sam regarded him for a moment, and then blew out a breath. "I know you didn't come here to argue with me about this. I know you, Jacob. Something has happened. I can see it on your face. Tell me." "Bella has given birth." Sam swore loudly, and the wolves exchanged looks. "What kind of creature did she have?" Sam asked quickly. "Did Bella survive? Has the treaty been broken?" Jacob felt a flash of annoyance. "She had a child, not a creature. A very special child, who is not a danger to anyone. And the treaty has not been broken." Sam looked surprised at Jacob's words about Renesmee, but relieved to hear that the treaty had not been broken. "So Bella survived human?" "No," said Jacob quietly, pained. "Then she is dead?" Sam asked, shocked. Jacob shook his head. "No, the Cullens have changed her. She's in transition right now." "So then the treaty has been broken," Sam growled. The wolves behind him moved restlessly, closing in together. "Not exactly," said Jacob. "I gave Edward permission to break the treaty to save Bella's life." There was a shocked silence, and Sam's eyes flared wild. "And who gave you the right to make such a decision?" "My great-grandfather," said Jacob, his voice steady. Sam's eyes narrowed, his face black, but he did not respond. Jacob waited for a moment and then went on. "The Cullens need to be able to move freely about their lands. I've come to ask you to call off the pack and move back behind the treaty lines." Sam shook his head. "The matter still remains of the offspring," he said. "A child, you say? What kind of child?" What guarantee do we have that it won't grow into something dangerous?" Jacob looked down at the ground for a moment, and then back at Sam. "Her name is Renesmee," he said softly. "And that is the other thing, the most important thing that I've come to talk to you about." He closed his eyes, letting thoughts of Renesmee take him for a moment. The shine of her existence created a calm glow within him. He opened his eyes straight into Sam's. "I know she is not dangerous. She is gentle and kind and amazing. She is the most precious thing in the world to me. I have imprinted on her." Sam's face froze. There was an endless, stunned silence at his words. Sam and the wolves behind him seemed frozen with shock. Finally, Sam shifted, his arms falling loosely to his sides. "That's impossible," he breathed. Jacob just watched him, waiting, and then amazement filtered into Sam's eyes. "I can see that it is true," he said, shaking his head in confusion. "Is it human?" Jacob's eyes narrowed slightly. "She is just a baby, but it seems like she is part human, part vampire, a mix of her parents." Sam's eyes widened. "Part vampire? Does she drink blood?" Jacob crossed his arms, looking defensive. "Yeah, she does. Donated blood. She's trying other things." Sam's gaze sharpened. "Is she strong? Can she be controlled? What about when donated blood isn't enough?" Jacob growled in frustration. "Like I said, Sam, she's just a baby. But she's smart, so smart already, and she would never hurt anyone." He glared at Sam's skeptical face, and his voice grew softer. "If you could see her like I do, you'd understand. You would see how amazing she is, how wonderful." Sam's face hardened. "You are obviously not capable of being an impartial judge of this situation, Jacob. You never have. You can't truly tell us that she is not a threat." "Sam," Jacob's voice was loud now, "I've imprinted on her. You know what that means, what she means to me now. You, of all people, know." He took a step forward, his hands in tight fists. "You know there isn't anything I wouldn't do to keep her safe." Sam stepped back, holding up a hand. "Jacob, you and you've imprinted on her. Regardless of my personal feelings, I would never harm her. But that doesn't mean I don't question if she is not a danger to our people." Jacob glowered. Suddenly, there was a breath of wind, and Quill and Embry phased, stepping up next to Sam. He glanced at them sharply, but didn't say anything. "You really imprinted on Bella's kid?" said Embry, his voice astonished. "A half-vampire?" "Yup," said Jacob. Embry's eyes grew even wider. Quill shook his head. A small smile played on his lips. "That's twisted, man." Then he walked over to Jacob and slapped his hand on his shoulder. "But congratulations, Jake. Congratulations." He pulled Jacob into a hug, and Jacob embraced him back, shocked but pleased. "Wow," said Embry, grinning. "Who'd have thought?" Paul and Jared phased as well, their expressions a mingle of amusement and irritation. "Geez, Jake," said Paul. "Can't anything be easy with you? What's wrong with a regular girl?" Jacob smiled at him and shrugged, and then looked around his friends at Sam. Sam still stood back, his expression shocked and guarded. He met Jacob's eyes. "Well, it's hard to understand, and it changes many things. There is still much to discuss between us. However, I need to speak to Carlyle first, before we can re-establish the treaty lines." So now they were headed back to our house, Sam and Jacob in front, Paul and Jared following behind. Jacob had already told Leah and Seth not to approach, but to meet them at the house, and shockingly, It appeared that Sam and Jacob had discovered they could communicate with each other, not in the intimate communication of the alpha and pack, but the ability to direct specific thoughts into each other's minds, a sort of bond among alphas. I refocused on my father and brothers, who were watching me expectantly. Their trip is peaceful. Sam just wants to speak to Carlyle before the treaty is re-established. Jasper and Emmett exchanged looks. "We should intercept them in the woods," Emmett said, "before they get too close to the house." They started to turn towards the door. "No," I snapped. "That would look confrontational." "No kidding," Emmett grumbled. "Edward," Jasper growled. "The last thing we heard from these wolves was that they were waiting till the baby was born to make their decision. What if they've decided she's a danger? I don't want them anywhere near this house, or Renesmee." Protectiveness surged through his body, some absorbed from the family around him, but much of it springing from within him. "They know Jacob has imprinted on her," I said sharply. "Do you honestly think they would still hurt her?" "What the hell do we know about what those mongrels will do?" Emmett muttered. I heard Rosalie hiss in agreement downstairs. "We have to give them a chance," said Carlyle. "This appears to be a peaceful meeting." "Then why did Sam bring backup?" said Jasper. "They're entering into enemy territory," I said. "What do you expect them to do?" But Paul and Jared did make me nervous. Why had he brought the most hostile members of his pack? Jasper gritted his teeth. "How far out?" he asked. "Hang on," I muttered, holding up a hand. I surveyed the forest surrounding Jacob through his eyes. "They are just coming up on the property line." I was starting to get a lock on Sam's thoughts. "Stay back here," Sam thought to Paul and Jared as they approached our property. They ignored him, continuing to run behind in position. "I said stay here." Sam's thoughts echoed the command of the alpha, and Paul and Jared stopped awkwardly, their paws seemingly glued to the spot. They both growled as they watched Sam and Jacob continue towards the house. "He's left Jared and Paul in the forest. It's just Sam," I said softly. My brothers relaxed a little. "Let's meet them on the front porch," said Carlyle. He looked at me. "Are you coming, Edward?" I glanced up in shock, and then looked pointedly at Bella. "No," I said firmly. Carlyle's gaze lingered on me for a moment, and then he waved at the others to go ahead of him. "We might need you to mediate the conversation and translate for Sam," Carlyle thought, his eyes fixed on mine. "Will you be willing to come down if we need you?" "No," I said softly. "I won't leave Bella. I won't go that far from her. What if she woke up and I wasn't beside her?" "You could be up here in seconds," Carlyle said softly. "No, I won't risk it," I growled. "I promised her I would be with her." I swallowed hard. "Sam will just have to deal with it." Carlyle watched me for another moment and then left, going down the staircase and passing through the front room, where Rosalie, Alice, and Esme sat anxious on the couch. I took Bella's hand in mine and kissed it softly, silently waiting for the talk to begin.